G'day folks, today I'm really looking forward to having a chat with Allan Will. We go back almost 2 decades when he gave me the opportunity to lead Ardian, a foundry company. Allan has had an oversized impact on our industry, founding, leading, financing and advising so many companies, including now as an influential board member here at Fogarty Innovation. He has co-founded 11 companies, been the CEO of at least 7 companies and organizations, and has founded and been a general partner of 2 venture capital firms. He is currently the chairman of the board at Setpoint Medical, Fractal and EBR Systems. More than anything, Allan has had a spectacular career as a mentor to so many of our industry's greatest contributors. He continues to be a mentor to me, and I remain honored and humbled. We intend to explore what made Allan the leader he is today, from his childhood experiences through his admirable career. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming today.
Pleasure to be here, Andrew.
So I've been looking forward to this actually for quite some time. I promise I'll stick to the questions and not ask any tough ones.
Oh,
I don't think so.
wait and see on that.
All right. So the whole point of this is to learn, who you are. So can you tell us a little bit about growing up? What was it like?
Sure. Well, some folks have said that I still haven't grown up, but I was born in Chicago, and at the time, my family lived in a community there that was one of the nation's first intentionally multi-religious, multiracial, multi-ethnic communities in the country. So it was a very interesting place to be, one that really celebrated diversity. And by that I mean we literally celebrated each other's religious occasions and other holidays. It was tremendous. It was a great place to grow up, and one of the unfortunate things that I remember that really stuck with me was when I was young, I witnessed a cross being burned on my neighbor's front lawn. They were an African-American family, and the Ku Klux Klan had come into the community and done that. So even though I grew up in a community where it was viewed as normal to celebrate diversity, that certainly wasn't the norm in the 50s.
Yeah, I was going to say, so this is in the 50s. Yeah, we're in 2023 today, and it still impacts you.
Yes. Oh.
So, but it's had an impact to this day. How much of that living experience shaped who you became?
I think that living experience was just part of who my parents were and who my family was too. So they were certainly the greatest influencers on my life. They placed very high importance on morals and ethics and how you treated others. And I think that's really been sort of my North Star for my whole life. At least I've tried.
And you've done well. Tell me more about them, about Mom and Dad.
Sure. My dad was a lawyer by training, but never practiced law. He became the Methodist Church's spokesman on human rights issues, which is why we moved from Chicago to Maryland so that he could work with Congress. He spoke nationally and internationally on issues like fair housing, peace, human rights in general. My mother was one of the nation's first Head Start teachers. So she contributed in different ways that were quite important at the time. 2 people I'm quite proud of to this day. You see the emotion.
It's beautiful. But you also grew up marching. I mean, so the 60s were a time of protest, of turbulence.
Yeah.
You grew up. They didn't hide you from it.
Oh, no.
You were part and parcel.
Oh, yeah. I can remember going on fair housing marches when I was 13 years old. And living outside D.C., politics was front and center, and the issues my father dealt with that, we as a family believed were critically important were right in front of us the whole time. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it has. I mean, I see it. I see it in the way you interact with people. It has had a defining sort of impact on your life. Did you grow up playing sport?
Oh yeah, yeah. I played basketball. Actually, started out wrestling because my older brother was a wrestler, and that was kind of, you do what your older brother does and try to follow along. And I remember going to some of his practices where they were all wearing these rubber suits and running and spitting to try to lose weight to make their weight class. And that was when I decided I was going to start playing basketball.
Yeah.
I played basketball through freshman year of college and loved the sport.
Yeah, it was good.
Till my knees could no longer support it.
Yeah, which was a couple of years ago.
Right.
Not that long ago. All right, so off to college. Originally started at Washington and Lee University in Virginia, but then moved on to the University of Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
What were you doing at Maryland? What did you do?
So went down to W&L, and interestingly, I really hadn't taken a lot of science courses before then. And at W&L, I got really intrigued by the sciences, biology, zoology. But at Washington and Lee, the classes were pretty much targeted at becoming a physician. They were pre-med classes and much more narrow. Maryland had a much broader curriculum in the sciences and zoology, so that was one reason to transfer. And frankly, the other reason was Washington and Lee, not only was it a small school, but it was all men. And at that point in time, I wanted a co-ed curriculum.
But you went on to do zoology.
Yeah.
So I was trying to work out, why did you choose that path? And then it's very ironic to look off into the future where you're a mentor to so many CEOs. I just wonder if that zoology background gave you the skill set.
Yeah.
So why zoology?
Well, it was the difference between zoology and biology was not that far apart, really. But I was intrigued by animal behavior, honestly. So now you get to the CEO role. And, I thought that was where I was going to head. Worked my way through school at working full time to pay for my education. And one of the things I did along the way was work at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, in a biochem lab. But that taught me I didn't want to work in a lab. I needed to work around people more. And honestly, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the degree. I was just taking classes that interested me. I think it worked well. I don't know that the animal behavior, helped me lead companies, but
no, I think
maybe.
I think it actually did. No, where I meant that, we do the left-off internship every year, and it's always it's been the same the last few years. The young folks that are going into these courses are seeming very structured. They're really starting to plan out. You had an idea of what you wanted to do, but there wasn't, I guess, the intent was to learn and to do something that you enjoyed more than being fit for purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know what I wanted to do with the degree. I just knew I enjoyed the subject. The sciences, and biology and zoology. Got out of school and still didn't know what I wanted to do. I sent letters to every state in the union, I think, and any agency that had to do with biology or zoology, animals or humans, and I got bullets back from everybody. Didn't get one acceptance. Luckily, I had worked a lot in the recreation department along the way through high school and college and coaching and reffing and all of that. And that enabled me to make a contact and get a job teaching high school for a year. So my first job was teaching high school. And they tried to put me in the sciences as much as possible, but I taught everything from science to math to English to cosmetology. And I was the assistant coach on the basketball team. And I thought, I'm 23 years old at the time and played college ball and assistant coach. I thought it was going to be easy, but I'll tell you, that was the most tiring job I've had in my life. I lived 15 minutes from the high school, and I'd be falling asleep in the car on the way home. I was exhausted being on stage all day. So I've got huge respect for being a teacher, but that was another thing I didn't want to do long term.
So then next was MIT. So you decided to go back to school.
Yeah. I worked for 4 years before going back to school. Sure. Yeah. And so I taught high school for a year, and then worked in health research consulting. It was in the early days of databases, and the government had these big, huge research programs that they couldn't get their arms around, couldn't track the programs. So we were developing databases and how they could search databases in various topics, and did that for about 3 years, and still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And so I thought I needed to get a degree that would get an advanced degree of some sort to help me make that next step, and didn't know what I wanted to do. So I thought a business degree would be about the most versatile that I could get. And in my undergrad at Maryland, I was an okay student, but I wasn't a stellar student. And so I figured I'd better put a stamp on myself. And I was able to get into MIT, and I wanted people to say, okay, well, this guy's smart, and he can work hard, and he can get through a program like this. And that's why I went there.
Did you enjoy it?
I loved it. It was a great place to go to school. It was pretty intense. I went through a program which was called the Accelerated Master's Program, which was in 12 months you took 2 years of classes and did your thesis. And so, and it was a smaller group of students. There were 42 of us in that class at the time. And everybody had worked for at least, I think, 4 years. And so you grew pretty close. And it was a terrific experience.
Where'd you start? After
Sloan?
Yeah.
So I, got out of school, and it was a time of, and actually the energy crisis, lines at the gas stations and all. And I had a decision to make. I had gotten intrigued with alternative energy sources just through some of the work at Sloan, but I also knew that with my biology background, that was, I could parlay that. And so I interviewed in both alternative energy and in healthcare. Ended up deciding to take a job at Abbott Labs in corporate planning and development. And that was the start of my work in medical devices.
So 5 years at Abbott, and then to become the first-time CEO at DVI. Number one, how did you get that opportunity? And then tell us a little bit about DVI.
Sure. Well, let's see. It probably pays to rewind a little bit in my past. There was a theme of interventional cardiology in my life. I don't much believe in fate. I think things happen because of who you are and the choices you make along the way. But when I was at Sloan at MIT, there was a professor that had us do a project modeling the adoption of a new medical technology. And this was 1981. And that technology was angioplasty. And back then there were maybe 5,000 angioplasties done, in the world. And so that was sort of my first exposure. And doing that project, I called up people like Andreas Grunzig, the father of angioplasty, and others to interview them to complete the project. And then when I went to work at Abbott, one of my first assignments in corporate planning and development was to write a new business plan to diversify Abbott out of their hospital products business, which was largely commoditized. It was solutions,
Yep.
sets, venipuncture devices. And my recommendation was that Abbott should get into interventional cardiology, interventional radiology, and arthroscopy. As a result of that, we made a minority investment in Boston Scientific. Boston was a $12 million revenue company at the time, and we struck a deal where we could acquire the business, Boston's business, after 9 years. So it was a 9-year earnout deal. And in that interim, Abbott funded any capital needs of Boston. Turns out that Abbott passed on that possibility to acquire Boston. Boston went public, and the rest is history for Boston Scientific. Abbott ended up getting into interventional cardiology in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, this was the path. And then I got approached by John Simpson to come to DVI. And by that time, I'd known about angioplasty from MIT. I'd known about it through Abbott. And coincidentally, my dad had developed coronary artery disease, and I'd gotten him in touch with Kenny Kent and Andreas Grunzig. And so it was pretty logical. I knew the background. I knew who John Simpson was, and it was a great opportunity. I was, at the time, running a $50 million business for Abbott, and I had wanted to move to smaller and smaller businesses. I didn't know exactly why, but I felt like I could have more control over how the companies were run, how people were treated, how to build a business. And, you know, we're always kind of a little bit full of ourselves early in our career,
and late.
Yeah, and maybe late. And I thought I could do it better. So I took the leap and left the big company and went to DVI when there were 16 people. And the rest is history. It was a great learning experience.
So I think you just probably described, and I can't wait to go back and listen to this, the reason that folks do go into small companies rather than large companies. It's a little bit more control over the destiny, but it is the combination of all those things you just said. So what was DVI?
So the DVI was John Simpson's second company. John was one of the early angioplasty pioneers. And John had decided that cutting and removing plaque would be better than pushing it against the walls of the artery. And so we developed a technique called directional coronary atherectomy, or DCA. And so we had catheters that we developed that would go in and cut and remove plaque, starting in the peripheral vessels, and then eventually we got into the coronaries. As I said, there were 16 people when I came in, and it was just a tremendous experience. I got to experience pretty much the whole thing. I took DVI from a Series B financing to 3 years later selling it to Eli Lilly and growing it for 5 years under an earnout to a $100 million run rate and 600 and some people. So I was just really lucky to link up with John Simpson, some of the others that were involved. It was also when I first met Tom Fogarty.
You just mentioned, two of the guys that have been integral to almost every conversation we've had in this series, which is Simpson and Fogarty. Two guys that were hugely influential in all of our careers. So DVI ended up being bought by Eli Lilly, as you said. You spent some time there. One of the things that I was really intrigued about is, prior to what we now know as the spin-off with Guidant and the sort of the breakup of the Lilly franchise there, medtech franchise, you actually tried a leverage buyout.
Yeah. So it happened that at the when we completed our earnout at the end of 1993, which was 5 years post the acquisition, I announced that I was leaving the company, and it was at our national sales meeting in early '94. Coincidentally, Lilly announced they were going to divest themselves of the device companies that they had purchased over the years. John came to me and said, Allan, let's buy DVI back. And I said, well, you know, John, it wouldn't make sense to buy just DVI. You know, we really should buy all of the interventional cardiology businesses if we do anything.
Which were?
Which was ACS and DVI. And he said, well, great, let's do it. I said, well, John, you've made good money so far selling ACS and DVI, but probably not enough to buy. He said, well, let's go find the money. And I said, okay. And so we went out and and Tom Fogarty was involved, and actually Dick Kramlich from NEA became involved a little bit. And we worked with Alex Brown and Donaldson Lufkin Jenrette as bankers, and ended up raising $2 billion to make a run at the Lilly device companies. And at the end of the day, made an offer for $2 billion. And this was not just the cardiology businesses. It ended up being not just the interventional cardiology businesses, it ended up being the heart rhythm business as well. So it was all of the cardiovascular related businesses that we made a run at. We ended up being one of the 3 final bids presented to the board of directors. The other 2 bidders, coincidentally, were Pete Nicholas, who was running Boston Scientific at the time, and Ron Matricaria, who was running St. Jude at the time, who had the backing of the Pritzkers. And along the way, actually, Ron came forward to John and I and said, hey, guys, you want to just combine our bids? We ended up saying no, because we partnered up with, we set our feet on a path, and we had our partners. But so the 3 bids went into Lilly. The board of directors considered what to do and decided that the best thing for their shareholders would be to spin the companies out in the form of a dividend, and that was much better for their shareholders. Much worse for us. We would have been an amazing if we could have done as well as Ron and his team did at Guidant eventually. It would have been an amazing
a good ride.
situation.
I was just surprised shouldn't have been surprised, but I remember being a bit taken aback by, that's a cheeky thing to be doing you were pretty young.
Yeah.
Big vision.
Yeah. At the time, I guess so. Yeah, I was 40 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a while ago.
Yeah, long time ago. But the DVI experience was just tremendous for me. It's the full spectrum. 16 people to 600, and negotiating an acquisition, doing multiple structures of financings, and all of the people that I met along the way. It was a really lucky guy to walk into that as my first CEO job.
And then what was your second?
Second one was, along the way, Tom and I co-founded a company, and there were some other things, but the next big one was Anuerx.
Yep.
Yeah. So Tom came to me and asked whether I'd run Anuerx, which was his stent graft company, and coincidentally, there were 16 people there at the time when I joined it. And, 3 years later, we ended up selling the company to Medtronic, launching the product in Europe. We were 3 years behind the competition, and 3 years later, we ended up launching on the same day in Europe and in the U.S., and same day as they launched. And Medtronic took 80% market share the first year we launched the product. I think it went to $175 million the first year. But I give huge credit to Tom Fogarty in that situation. Tom has a way of understanding the real needs in a product, and then working with the engineers to give them the guidelines of what they needed to do, but not telling them how to do it. And then our engineers took it from there. But Tom had his sights on a certain way that the product should work, and then the engineers translated that effectively. But that's what made the product and the company so successful. And I think Medtronic's stent graft products now are well over $1 billion.
It's still very successful franchise.
Yeah.
So in both instances, both DVI and Anuerx, they were relatively quick, or not relatively, very quick executions.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What were they similar? Is this your leadership style? Yeah. Why were they both, very quick turnarounds?
Well, I think it was a different time,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. The DVI, we sold the company to Lilly when we had peripheral vascular approval, but not coronary. Anuerx, we sold to Medtronic before we treated patient number 1.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, for one, the large companies were willing to acquire companies much, much earlier than they are today. Part of that was the fear that somebody else would acquire the business.
Sure.
And part of it was just, I think, the way the market received their actions when they did something like that. I think today things would be received much differently, and I think there's also, I think they recognize that it's unlikely that you're going to get acquired that early most of the time, so they don't feel like they're going to be missing out if they don't acquire early.
Yep.
I think 12 was an exception to that rule, in that that field was so hot at the time that they felt like, corporates felt like they needed to acquire businesses early.
Yeah. Well, look, in that example, the market had been validated with TAVI beforehand, right? So this was an obvious entry. So
Yeah.
I think it's an artificially tight construct there.
Yeah.
But it's because all of that work had been done in a sister program effectively. But yours were two new things. They were two different things. First time I thought about it, that it would be good to go back and have another conversation one day. And is it about the execution, the way in which you went about it?
Well, the execution was important, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. We had a great team at both places. DVI had just a a lot of the people that came out of there. We had great talent, and John, really set the tone of the guiding light on patient being first, and this is what it's about. And I've got great admiration for John Simpson, and Tom thinks exactly the same way, that we're all about the patient. This is not about creating a business. This is not about trying to make money. This is about doing the best thing for the patient that you can do, and I think that set the tone. And then execution was important, And one of the things, as I said, I left Abbott to try to create a company in the image that I wanted it, and it was I like to believe it was a very collaborative place, and demanding, but collaborative, and one in which great talent learned a lot along the way, and a lot of us were young there, and it was a great learning experience.
Well, that was quite an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed learning more about Allan's life and early career. Be sure to subscribe to MedTech Trailblazers to learn more about him and his unique skill sets in the second episode of this series. Cheers.